Okay, class lecture number 5. All right, during our previous class meeting, we talked about a lot of things, as we always do, and I say that every time because we do talk about a lot of things, including Peter the Great, one of my favorite heroes. I love Peter the Great. We also talked about, and we went over to England and mentioned that about Charles II. Charles II, who was the son of Charles I. You know, Charles I had been beheaded during the Glorious Revolution, and of course that was in 1649. And it was not the Glorious Revolution here, folks. It was the English Civil War, and we'll talk about the Glorious Revolution in just a few minutes. I've already got that on my mind here. And for Charles II, the enemy of virginity and chastity made a deathbed conversion to Catholicism. He'd be followed by his brother, who is James II, also the son of Charles I. And James II, also known as the Duke of York. And he would assume the reign of the crown in 1685, and of course something will happen in 1688, 3 years later, which is known as the Glorious Revolution, in which James II is deposed. And following him, he'll be followed by his daughter and also his son-in-law. And those people, of course, are William and Mary. William III of Orange and Mary II. He recognized those individuals, too. And then we went through a section here on colonization down in the Caribbean. Always fun places to visit there, folks. Work that into your busy schedules. And you need to do that. You need to go down and visit all those islands. They're fun places to visit here. All right, and we mentioned that about the triangular trade. We talked about the slave trade for many, many years. And it took place 254 years, as a matter of fact. And I hope by now you recognize that it was not 95% of the slaves or 100% of the slaves that were taken from the Africa, 11 million of those that actually went to North America. It was not that way at all. It was only 5%. Only 5%. It was, on the average here, my friends, it was less than 2,000 a year. And anyway, let's move right along here, folks. I think we mentioned a section here about freedom. Freedom is a privilege. It is not a right, and it's not for everyone. I hope you remember what sumptuary laws are, because you'll see that in the future here. Sumptuary laws are dress codes. All right, we mentioned about the Great Fire of London. I almost said the Great Fire of Chicago because of my U.S. history class. Just coincidentally, I'm talking about the Great Fire of Chicago. It's the Great Fire of London, and which took place in which the king's baker, if you will, Thomas Fariner, did not fully extinguish the flames and the embers that were in the royal oven. And it sparked out and set fire to that building, set fire to the adjacent, and anyway, we had 430 acres that were destroyed in London. Today, if you visit London, it is an ordinance there that you cannot build within the inner confines of London unless it is composed of stone or brick or rock or something on that order anyway. All right, now I think we're toward the end of the class period. I mentioned to you about a new religion that will form. John Charles Wesley, these were brothers. This religion, of course, is called Methodism. And I think we also talked about carnival, which is a manner in which people would entertain themselves with that. It was a world turned upside down. You know, we had the peasants dressed up to look like royalty, throw fake money, to the poor, to the rich, walk backwards, and whatever the case. Doesn't seem like very amusing times to me, but for that time, it apparently was. All right, and anyway, I think I closed out talking to you about taverns. All right, so let's move on into our next topic here, folks. It's a big topic, a lot of things to discuss today, and we're going to go back to France for a while, and back into England for a while. But I want to tell you, during the 17th and 18th century, it was almost constant warfare. And the principal reason for this is that of Louis XIV. This guy that we talked about before, the Sun King here. And with this, we'll find that our armies will grow enormous in size here. Ordinarily, they were about 40,000 in an army, but now we're going to see them increase dramatically. So let's go to our document scanner here, folks, and let's see what we have with this. And warfare taking place constantly. All right, now Louis XIV, if you can't read that, this is Louis XIV, that is there. By 1661, he had a French army of 20,000. 1688, it was an army that had grown to the size of 290,000. 694, this army had grown to 400,000. It was the largest in Europe. All right, and we're also going to see that for Louis XIV, he will engage in quite a bit of warfare. In 1681, he will take over the area of Strasbourg. Strasbourg was where today it's in French-controlled territory, but back in those times it was in German-controlled territories. By 1684, he took over, this is Louis XIV, took over the area of Luxembourg. Luxembourg is still present there today. It's not a whole lot bigger, larger than Walker County, by the way. Fun place to visit there, too. And in 1688, Louis XIV burned the city of Cologne. Now, Cologne, you pronounce it as Cologne, but that is the way that we've done it in this country. We've anglicized it, if you can use that phrase there. He also took over the town of Heidelberg. Took over the town of Heidelberg. And today, if you visit Heidelberg, you can go to Heidelberg Castle. That was one of the places that Louis XIV actually attacked there. All right, so in response to that, the other nations, other than France, began to form a coalition. They referred to this coalition as the League of Augsburg. It would consist of Netherlands, Austria, Sweden, and gradually we'll see other nations added into this League of Augsburg. All right, so this is going to generate some wars. And one of the wars is referred to as the 9 Years' War, and that's the way I teach it here in this Western Civilization course, the 9 Years' War, 1689 to 1697. If you take my U.S. history course, we refer to it as King William's War. King William's War, and that's, of course, of William and Mary advantage, if you will. And in this war, Louis XIV, it's Louis XIV of France against the League of Augsburg, nations I mentioned to you a few minutes ago. And in addition to that, it's also England and Spain. So it's almost a world war, almost a world war. And this war will end with a treaty, which is called a Treaty of Ryswick. Now, all of these treaty names here are names of cities that are found in the Netherlands. And anyway, I'm not going to hold you responsible for the Treaty of Ryswick. It takes place in 1697 here. Okay, and with all of these wars, almost everything returns to exactly the way it was before the wars began. All right, so let's move on here, folks. We'll go briefly here to Spain. And the king of Spain at that time was Carlos II, Charles II. And Charles II was at that point dying, and he really had no heirs to the throne, no close heirs to the throne, like a son or a daughter. And it just so happens that Louis XIV and the Austrian Habsburg leader, Leopold I, both of these guys are married to sisters. And these are sisters that are daughters of Charles II. And both of those individuals, Louis XIV and Leopold I, were trying to use their influence to convince the dying Charles II to let them choose who Charles II's replacement is. And it's actually Louis XIV that gets the best of this. And he makes a decision here that he is going to appoint his grandson, Philip of Anjou, who will later be known as Philip V, as the King of Spain. And that is going to happen. That will take place there, folks, and that takes place. But as a result of that, what we're going to see here is that Louis XIV will now invade the Netherlands. And this brings forth another war. And this war is referred to as the War of Spanish Secession. And let me put that up here for you, good folks here. It is a War of Spanish Secession. If you take my U.S. history course, we refer to this war as Queen Anne's War. Queen Anne's War. That was the sister of Queen Mary, and of Mary and William and Mary. This war will last from 1702 to 1712. 1702, 1712 is France and Spain versus England and Austria. And I will tell you, good folks, that this was actually a very, very serious war. It was quite a bloody affair with that. It will end with the Treaty of Utrecht. The Treaty of Utrecht, and I really don't care that you know that anyway. And one of the things that's going to be gained out of this is England is going to win. England's going to be given Gibraltar and also Minorca. All right, now you probably don't know where those places are. At least you don't know where Minorca is. So I want to share with you where these places are located. So let's go down to Spain here, and where Gibraltar is located, it is right here. It's only about 7 miles from Africa. You've probably heard it referred to as the Strait of Gibraltar, or maybe the Rock of Gibraltar too, because that's exactly what it is here. And where Minorca is this island, which is right there. All right, now Minorca today is controlled by Spain, but Gibraltar is still controlled by England. And that's kind of a crazy, crazy situation here, folks. And I want to go back to my camera here so I can show you what Gibraltar looks like. And That's what it looks like. It's right on the very southern tip there of Spain itself, and you can look directly across the Mediterranean there, and you can see Africa, which is, like I said, about 7 miles away. High winds that are present there. This is known as the Rock of Gibraltar there. Use my finger for that. This is called the Rock of Gibraltar. If you look at it, doesn't it look like a broken tooth? Yeah, I think it looks like a broken tooth. But when you travel there today, this is Great Britain-controlled territory. In fact, the license plates that they have there is GBV, Great Britain Zone. Great Britain Zone. Now, if you go over to this area right through here and go back this way here a half a mile, that's Spain. Now, the Gibraltar was originally a part of Spain, and by all rights, I feel like that England should have given Gibraltar back to Spain, but they did not. So all the way from this period here, from 1712 all the way to 2020, England still controls this Strait of Gibraltar. And this Rock of Gibraltar here. A lot of Barbary apes that are found there. In fact, they can be quite a nuisance here, folks. And I'm talking about monkeys, and you better be careful because they will bite you too, and actually will lift things right out of your very pocket. All right. And the crazy thing about it is when you're approaching Gibraltar and you're leaving Spain itself, you go through customs, which is right along through here, and then for you to actually get up into the city of Gibraltar, the main road crosses an airport, and I'm talking about a large airport with commercial jet traffic there, and you would think you would have something a little bit more secure than that, but it's not that way. So if a plane is coming in or taking off, which happens very, very frequently anyway, then all traffic comes to a close there, and you have to wait for the plane to either land or to take off with that. And the crazy thing about it is that when you leave Gibraltar and you go back into Spain, you've got to go through customs again. So it's really quite an aggravating thing there, in that area of Gibraltar. But it's a fun place to visit, by the way. And as you can imagine, there being so close in that narrow Strait of Gibraltar, the military significance and the strategy that it is behind in controlling that area, because it's such a key point there, in military travel that travels through the Strait of Gibraltar. All right, so let's go back to our camera here because we got a lot to go here, folks, and we'll get this out of the way here about the Strait of Gibraltar. All right, and let's move on here, folks. I want to go into the section here on France for just a short second here. After 1715, and the passing away of Louis XIV, he'll be followed by his great-grandson, who is Louis XV. He'll rule over France from 1715 to 1774. He would have loved to have been a rival to his great-grandfather, Louis XIV, but that's just not the case here. Not a whole lot to say about Louis XV here. He issued an edict that would restrict the rights of Parliament, just kind of make it a rubber stamp Parliament. The one thing I remember most is the only thing I really remember about Louis the 15th was his sexual appetite. Now, he was so afraid that he would contract syphilis, and he honestly was. His great-grandfather had syphilis. It did not take his life. I don't think it contributed to his death anyway, but he was so afraid that he would contract syphilis that he had many young mistresses. So his idea, in fact, he had 7 sisters from one family that were mistresses of his, and so he had hundreds of mistresses. But he was so afraid that he was going to contract syphilis that he would keep his mistresses as quite young girls. And so he had several hundred of these girls. He's like a Harvey Weinstein. But he had several hundred of these girls that were just, shall we say, in training here. And these girls were the age of 9 years of age up to 18 years of age. So his idea behind this was that if you keep these girls inexperienced and he is the only person that has contact with them, then he reduces his likelihood of contracting syphilis here. Now, before you think that this guy's a pervert, I will want to straighten you out on that. He did not put these girls into active service until they turned to the age of 14. All right, but nonetheless, here he died of smallpox. Okay, so let's go back to our documents camera here, folks, and let's see who else we have here. All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit about Prussia. This is a kind of lengthy subject here, folks, and I promised this to you a couple of days ago that you're going to see a number of these Prussian leaders with very similar names. All right, now when we talk about Prussia, I want to include with that Brandenburg. So, and actually the way we write it is Brandenburg, Prussia. And when I wrote these notes out for you a couple of days ago, I just put Prussia down, and I thought I better add Brandenburg to that. All right, just to refresh your memory, one of the individuals that was a emperor, and that's what they are the emperors here to Brandenburg, Prussia. Already talked about this individual, 1640, 1688, Frederick William, and Frederick, the great elector. All right, now, when he dies, he'll be followed by his son, and his son from 1688 to 1713 is that of Frederick I. Frederick I. Not a lot to Frederick I. He was culturally inclined and enhanced the appearance to Berlin. But other than that, there's really nothing really noteworthy about Frederick I. Now, when he died in 1713, his rule will fall into the hands of his son, and his name is Frederick William I. You can see how this gets very confusing very quickly here. All right, let me square this up here so we don't get a little overlap. That Frederick William I. And what he did, he built a first-class army, and this army consisted of 83,000. It was the fourth largest army in Europe. It was, without question here, it was the most professional army that we had in Europe. He's known by many people as the Sergeant King. He's known by many people as the Soldier King. Some people refer to him as the Drill Master of Europe, and it was just a quite efficient army there. Okay, and the thing about it is, he never put that army to war, which I think is rather amazing. It was well trained, but he never put that army to war. All right, so let's move on with, and I'm still talking about Frederick William I here. Let's get this down where you can see some of my notes here. All right, like I said, he had an army of 83,000. It was the fourth largest army in Europe, and he had a special regiment. And this regiment is referred to as the Potsdam Giants. Now, Potsdam is a city right outside of Berlin. If you hang around this course long enough here, folks, I'll talk to you again about Potsdam towards the end of the semester anyway, and I hope all of you stay around. But the minimum height to be a member of the Potsdam Giants was 6'2". 6'2". And you may think, well, I'm 6'2". You know, I'd be an excellent candidate for the Potsdam Giants. Well, that's just not the case, because the average height at this period of time here was only about 5'6", maybe 5'7". You know, so a person that is minimum height of 6'2", you know, is an extremely tall individual. So they call it the Potsdam Giants. And for many of these rulers from other countries, they would recruit giants, saying that term loosely here, from their own countries, and they would just dispatch those individuals down to Berlin and join this group, this elite group there, the Potsdam Giants. All right, I kind of like that. Now, for Frederick William, let's see if I have a likeness here of Frederick William, and this does him too much good here, folks. That's what he looks like there. Frederick William, does it have the title here? Yeah, Frederick William I. Notice the name here, which is in German, Friedrich Wilhelm. Friedrich Wilhelm. And I wish your textbook would just use that, but they don't, so I have to just use the Anglicized version of that. All right, but that was a nice portrait there of Frederick William I, but he was actually 5'3". He had an 8.5 foot waistline. He weighed 280 pounds. Now, what I'm going to do for you folks, and what I do in class, if we were face to face, I'm going to show you what an 8.5 foot waistline looks like. And we would take myself and two students, and we would stretch this string. Here's the string here, and I'm going to pull this string across here, and we'll do some more string right here, and we'll do some more string right here, and more string right here, and more string right here, and here's some more string, and string finally ends. Well, that is the belt line there. That is the waistline size of Frederick William I. He looked like a top, if you understand what I'm talking about with that. Needless to say, do you think he liked beer? Do you think he liked German beer? And you betcha, he loved German beer. All right, more on that in just a second here. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Frederick William I. He wasn't a very nice looking guy in the first place, but he would take bacon grease and he would smear bacon grease all over his face. Don't ask me why, it just made him look mean. It made him look tough. He would go into the streets of Berlin and just physically beat physically assault just the citizens of Berlin itself, He carried 2 pistols on his body, which were loaded with rock salt. And if anybody got in his way and didn't move out of his way quick enough, he would just fire that rock salt right into the individual there. Like I said a few minutes ago, he loved beer, and he would often gather with his friends up at the Charlottenburg Palace right there, and they would drink beer together up on the 2nd floor. And the more they drank and the drunker they got, then they would become abusive of the court jester, the court fool. And often what they would do is they would take the court fool and just literally pitch him out the 2nd floor window down into the moat. And just like a cannonball, the court fool would go splashing into the moat, and he would, I guess, paddle out, And on one occasion, they didn't realize that the moat was frozen over, and Frederick William I and his friends threw the court jester out, and he hit the ice that was down below, and he went bouncing across the ice, across the moat like a basketball. When the court jester died, they preserved his body in a barrel of wine. Anyway, that's Frederick William I. All right, now Frederick William I had a son. Anybody want to guess what his name is? His name is Frederick. Actually, his name is Frederick II. And for Frederick William I, he wanted his son to be just like him. He wanted his son to be a part of the military. In fact, he would wake young Frederick II up. They called him Fritz, by the way. But he would wake young Frederick up every morning with a cannon shot. He was just trying to make him a leader, trying to make him a soldier. And even at an early age, like age 5 and 6 years of age, Frederick William I provided for his son, Frederick II, young Fritz. He gave him an army of children that were 5 and 6 years of age, and was trying to teach him how to be a leader and march these little kids around. And Frederick II just did not have an interest in that. What he was interested in, he liked to read and he liked to play music. He loved to play the flute. He was a tutti frutti. That's what he was. Anyway, that was that. But I'm not through with this here. Well, for Frederick II, young Fritz had a friend, and this was an army lieutenant, by the way. And Frederick, young Fritz here, Frederick II, is probably about 18 years of age at the time I'm talking about. And Frederick II had this friend, this army lieutenant. And anyway, they decided that they just did not want to be around the dad, Frederick William I, any longer, and so the two of them took off. I don't know where they went, but Frederick William I, just like Peter the Great, told the people that were around him, the military personnel around him, he said, go find the boy and bring the boy back. And sure enough, they sent out a search party there, and they did find young Fritz, and brought young Fritz back with the army lieutenant. And the dad, Frederick William I, told Fritz, and he said, go to your room and look out the window. And sure enough, Frederick II here went up to the room, looked out the window, and as he looked out the window, Frederick William ordered the beheading of the friend. They were probably homosexuals, by the way, Fritz and Frederick II and this army lieutenant here, and cut his head off right in front of Fritz there. And it's so upsetting that young Fritz just fainted there on the very spot. But I will tell you this, he learned a lesson. He learned a very, very valuable lesson from that. So when Frederick William died, now we're going to see that Frederick II, young Fritz, now takes his place. And this individual here, folks, let me go back to my camera right here. This is all really good stories with that. And let's see here. And that individual right there, here, I've moved along here, is Frederick II. And Frederick II, who will now be recognized as Frederick the Great. Now, he took his father's army of 83,000, and one of the first things he did, he invaded Austrian-controlled territory of Silesia. All right, now the military personnel referred to him as Der alte Fritz, Der alte Fritz. If you translate that in German, that means the old Fritz, the old Fritz. Fritz is just a name here for Frederick. And let's see if I have some likenesses here to Der alte Fritz. This is what he looks like. This is Frederick the Great. That's Fritz, the son of Frederick William I. I have greatest admiration for this guy. I like him very, very much. A magnificent military leader here, folks, and would conquer, would take over much of Europe. But he will, after he invaded Silesia, he will spend his next 45 years consolidating those gains. And of course, this is going to bring forth a war, and I'll tell you about that war in just a few minutes here. Okay, let me share some more photographs with you. Now, where are they? Where Frederick the Great lived. He lived in this palace here, which is called Sanssouci Palace. It's in Potsdam, by the way. Sanssouci Palace. This was one of several palaces that they used here. You can visit there today if you wish to do so. It's a nice place to visit there. No air conditioning inside, so if you're going into summer, you will roast yourself. And you will also find the burial site there of Frederick the Great. And let's see here. Is that in German? It is. Okay. All right. So it says in German here, Frederick the Great, König is king, but that's Sanssouci Palace right there. Notice there that one of the things that Frederick II will do, Frederick the Great will do, he will introduce potatoes into the German culture there, and because Germany was starving, and by getting the potatoes, we'll talk about that later in the class period, this alleviated some of the starvation problems that we had. All right, here's another photograph of that same burial site there, and that is not, that says Frederick the Great, not Frederick the King, by the way. I just happened to look at it a little bit better view up there, grosser. Anyway, okay, great. I just happened to pick this likeness up here, showing the portraits, various individuals that we've talked about here. Let's see here. Can I read this one here? Here's Frederick I. Here's Frederick William I, Frederick II here, and that's all that we talked about with that. Okay, so anyway, that's it. Okay, so let's move on here, folks. Now, I told you a second ago that when Frederick the Great invaded Silesia, this will bring forth another war. And this war, which is referred to as the War of Austrian Secession, takes place in 1744, 1748. It's Prussia versus Austria. Now, Prussia is that of Frederick the Great, and Frederick the Great is going against Austria. Austria at that time was led by Maria Theresa. Now, get comfortable with this, because if you're a student of this here, of this topic here, folks, there are many, or I should say there are several Maria Theresas. We've already talked about one a couple of lectures back here. All right, so you got to get yourself kind of on your toes here about which Maria Theresa are you actually talking about, because Louis XIV, his wife was named Maria Theresa. But nonetheless here, this war is going to end with a treaty which is called Aix-la-Chapelle. All right, if I remember right, I think that's where Aachen is located. Aachen, Germany is located today. All right, so let's move on and see what else we have here, folks. All right, so since we broached the subject here of Austria and Habsburg and Maria Theresa, let's continue with that. Let me get this down here so you can read this. Okay, the Habsburgs of Austria. Maria Theresa, she ruled over the Austrian Empire from 1740 to 1780. And if you thumb through the pages of your textbook, you'll find a likeness of her. But from 1765 to 1780, she ruled jointly with her son, Joseph II. Today, if you visit Austria and you go to the Royal Palace in downtown Vienna, you'll see what is called the Hofburg. The Hofburg, and you can actually walk, if you look down below and you see it looks like a corridor here that's right there, you can actually walk right through there, right through the palace itself. And when you get into the back side of it there, you'll find a huge statue there of Joseph II. All right, and that's kind of cool here. Now, they had another palace. The Habsburgs used another palace. I'm digging around over here trying to find some photographs of it, and this is the way that it is spelled here. And if you ever see this word here, Schloss, it means castle. So, Castle Schönbrunn. Schönbrunn Palace is what it's referred to as, in English anyway. Well, there it has it right on the side, Schönbrunn Palace there. Very, very nice palace there. You cannot go into the palace for free, but you can wander the grounds there free of charge here. And I brought this one. This is a photograph that's taken during the twilight here in the evening. But that's what it looks like. You got to remember here that all these absolutist rulers are trying to compete with each other, and they're trying to match the greatness of the palaces as that at Versailles, which was Louis XIV, Louis XV, Louis XVI's royal palace. Okay, that's Schönbrunn Palace here. A beautiful place to visit there. You just take the U-Bahn and take the metro out to there. Okay, when Joseph II died in 1790, he'll be followed by his brother, who is Leopold II. Leopold II here. And I think that's all I'm going to tell you about Austria and Habsburg. All right, so let's go to one of my very, very favorite individuals here. And we're going to go an individual, but let's take ourselves first back to Russia. All right, I love Russia. And you can see how we spell it. I've spelled this for you in a couple of lectures back anyway. That's spelled in Cyrillic here as R-O-S-S-I, yeah, Russia. Russia. And one of the individuals we want to address here is that of Catherine the Great. And Catherine the Great's not even Russian, by the way. Catherine the Great was born in Stettin, Poland, so she's actually Polish, but her father was a German prince. Now, her reign will last from 1762 to 1796. She is not a Tsarina. She's not even a Roman Hof. She's not a Roman Hof. So technically, what her title will be is Empress of Russia. She is the Empress of Russia. Now, her given name, her dad gave her the name of Sophia. And so what she was scheduled to do, and marriages at that time were arranged. So she was supposed to be the bride to a Russian prince. And actually it was Russian Duke there, prince. And anyway, that individual's name, I wrote it down for you, is Peter, Duke of Holstein. Peter, Duke of Holstein. All right, now, in the first place, Peter, Duke of Holstein, I'm going to keep the camera here so that you can watch the words here, folks, rather than have to stare at me, because I've got good stories to tell you about this. And Peter, Duke of Holstein was not a very pleasant person to look at. He'd had smallpox, and he was just ugly in the first place. And by getting smallpox, it caused some serious scarring on his face, and so you're a little bit disfigured with that. Extremely immature. Was an alcoholic at an early age. And when Sophia Catherine, arrived in St. Petersburg, she was only about 14 years of age. And can you imagine that, leaving the area of Poland and traveling in a carriage, and you're going to be the bride at an appropriate age anyway, you're going to be the bride to this ugly guy right here, Peter, Duke of Holstein. And what he tried to do, he was always trying to impress her. He would do stupid things like, get himself blind drunk, put lampshades on his head here, and just extremely immature. And nevertheless, they ended up getting married. They got married here, folks. And eventually he became the Tsar of Russia. He was known as Peter III. But for the first 6 months, for the first 7 years of the marriage between Peter, Duke of Holstein, and Catherine, later Catherine the Great, anyway, they never consummated their marriage. Both were still in the virginal state, if you can imagine that there. And the reason for this is that Peter, Duke of Holstein, had a condition which is called phimosis. Now, in phimosis, this means that the prepuce, the foreskin, is too tight and it cannot be retracted. So this makes an erection extremely painful, and for the person that has phimosis, you have a tendency to avoid any kind of sexual activity. And like I said, he was extremely immature. So what he would do here, at night when they would go to bed, he played with wooden soldiers. He had wooden cannons, wooden horses, wooden soldiers, and he would get under the covers there and bang, bang, and just play like he was a general with that. He would often make Catherine go stand outside the doorway and stand at attention and pretend that she was a guard. Later, when he became Tsar, he would just create fake wars and send the army out to the outskirts of St. Petersburg and just have them shoot the cannons at nothing. And that's just kind of the guy that he was. So they were both still in virginal state. I didn't really mean to say that. Peter was in a virginal state, but for Catherine had gotten a lover. And this person's name was a Russian by the name of Sergei Saltykov. And he ended up impregnating her. So now Catherine, she's in a bind with this because she is pregnant and she's supposed to still be in the virginal state here. But actually by that time, she convinced Peter to get circumcised. And when he got circumcised, they did begin a sexual relationship. And she convinced him that she was a virgin and he took her virginity. And he convinced her that he was the father. She convinced him that he was the father of the child. All right, so he became Tsar here. And when he did so, there's no question about this in my mind, is that Catherine was behind this, and she was a co-conspirator with this. And 6 months after Peter became the Tsar he was assassinated by some of the friends of Catherine the Great. And a long story here, a lot of good documentaries if you really want to read into this, folks. But hook and crook here, she became the empress. And like I said, she's not even a Romanov. All right. So when she lived in the Hermitage and Winter Palace there, and she would end up dying on that date that I gave you right there, the 5th of November, 1796. Now, a lot of stories about Catherine here. She never married. She had a huge sexual appetite. It is so said that she had many, many lovers here. And by the way, she was an excellent horseback rider, by the way. If you want to look at a likeness here from, I just happened to glance down at my textbook here, and I'm sorry to interrupt myself here with that, and it looks like my book is not going to go under there. There it is. That's what Catherine looked like there, but she had a huge appetite in many, many ways, but she had a huge appetite for food, so she grew enormous in size. But like I said, you know, she had a number of lovers here, and often what she would do, she would take the ladies in waiting that took care of her, and she would have them audition the soldiers. Actually look outside of the Winter Palace and see the soldiers that were in formation or drilling out there, and she would either herself or some of her ladies in waiting there would say, "That's a nice looking guy right there, he's very fit." And so the ladies in waiting would actually audition the young soldier, and if they approved of him, then they would send her up to Catherine. She had a secret room on the back of her bedroom in which she could carry out these little trysts along the way. All right, so she also had two dwarfs, two little people who would take care of her, powder her hair, comb her hair, and just take care of her physical needs. All right, so that's Catherine the Great here. She awakened on the morning of the 5th of November in 1796, drank a cup of coffee, sat down on the commode, and she died of a stroke. Some historians will tell you that her weight was so heavy that it actually collapsed the commode. I really don't know that. All sorts of other little rumors that went around here. I put this out on my bulletin board on my easel for my students anyway. Catherine the Great horses around because there are many rumors for many years, and I've heard this all my life anyway, that she had an interest in bestiality with horses. And I will tell you, good folks, that's just nonsense. That did not take place with that. Just makes a good story, okay? All right, so anyway, let's move on back to England here, folks. I want to talk to you a little bit about England and Queen Anne after the death of William III of Orange. Then Queen Anne will become the queen. She was married to a pathetic drunk by the name of George. She had no children. She had 12 miscarriages. I think I told you that in an earlier time. She ruled from 1702 until 1714. All right, so let's move on with this and see who else we have to talk about with this. And since she had no children, that's the end of the line here. And that's the end of the line for the Stuarts. Queen Anne was the last Stuart. That's often trivial questions here, folks, or you'll find in crossword puzzles. Who was the last Stuart? And it is Anne. England at this time had an unwritten constitution, which is going to differ from the colonies, by the way. And the closest relatives were actually Germans. And this is the closest relatives to Anne, who was a Stuart, and it was Germans, and they were the Hanovers. The Hanovers, they called this the Hanoverians, by the way. So we're going to see a series of Georges, and it goes beyond what I wrote for you folks here. We have George I, too. He didn't even speak English, by the way. So he ruled in England and spoke German. But George I, 1714, 1727, George II, who did speak English, 1727, 1760, George III, 1760, 1820. And I'm telling you, good folks here, if you're an American citizen here, we owe our independence to George III. George III and the American Revolution. Very, very incompetent. Tried very well, but if I get a chance, I'll tell you a little bit more about George III at a later time. All right, let's move on here, folks. Now, after the Glorious Revolution, Parliament could now legislate, they could tax, and they could spend here. I'm not talking about spending money. They could fund money. But we're going to see another war to take place, and this is the 7 Years' War. And in this 7 Years' War, 1756, 1763, it actually is a world war. We got Prussia and England versus Austria, France, Russia, Sweden, and Spain. So it's a big, big war. If you take my U.S. history class, we refer to this war as the French and Indian War, and it is not the French versus the Indians. It's the French and the Indians against Great Britain. So anyway, and Great Britain wins that war, by the way. This war will end with what is called the Treaty of Paris. It's signed in 1763. This would be after the battle that took place in 1759, the Battle of Quebec, and I don't know if I'll show you photographs of Quebec later on or not. I'll see about that. Not today, anyway. Beautiful city, high on above the St. Lawrence River, and most fantastic and beautiful city. Okay, so the Great Britain won that war. They also won Canada as a result of that. But problems will happen with Great Britain. Great Britain had enormous debts, from that 7 Years' War. And so to liquidate these debts, they imposed a series of oppressive acts and taxes upon the American colonists. One of these is known as the Stamp Act. There were others there. You had the Currency Act, the Quartering Act, you had the Currency Act, but the Stamp Act was the worst of these acts here. And for the colonists will rebel against this. I'm not trying to make this an American history course by any means, so we'll go through this very quickly, and I'm not going to hold you responsible for it. But most of you are probably aware of the Boston Massacre. It took place on March the 5th in 1770. The Boston Tea Party took place on the 16th of December, 1773. And then the first shots of the American Revolution, which will occur at Lexington on 19th of April in 1775, and be followed a few hours later with the shots that took place at Concord. We'll have shortly thereafter the battle that took place at Bunker Hill, which was a British victory there. Take my U.S. history course, folks. We spent a lot of time talking about these. Washington crossing the Delaware on Christmas in 1776. Interesting story there. Consider if I can get these things to quit moving around here, folks. And a turning point of the Revolutionary War, 17th October 1777 at Saratoga. Precisely 4 years after that, we had the British under Lord Cornwallis that will surrender to George Washington at Yorktown. All right, and the war will end with the Treaty of Paris. That's another Treaty of Paris, and which will be signed in 1783. And guess what here, folks? America gains its independence. Okay, now life, and we'll change the subject here. Life during the 1600s, early part of 1700s, centered around literally just staying alive. It was incessant wars. There was famine that took place during this period of time. It was just not a very good way of life here. Okay, uncomfortable at best here. We had shortages of grain. Many people resorted to eating just grass and nuts, tree bark, acorns, and roots. You could expect a famine, a crop failure to take place about every 30 years, 1597, 1630, 1662, 1694, but you don't have to know about that. All right, in addition to this, we're going to see a return of bubonic plague. And bubonic plague, which will ravage the areas of Seville, that's in Spain, 1649, Amsterdam, 1664, London, 1665. And I told you the other day about the Great Fire of London that took place in 1666. It's going to help reduce the incidence of plague, primarily because the rats were burned to death. Okay, and we also had problems with dysentery, smallpox, typhus, all of these causing epidemics. So it was a tough time in just trying to stay alive. Population, on the other hand, by 1750 is going to increase. And we'll see it increases with a great rebound. Russia's population triples. Prussia's population doubles. Hungary's population triples. For England, its population will go from 5.5 million to 9 million. And notice this France's population from 20 million, 26 million, and that took place in 100 years, folks. All right. On the other hand, we're going to see some new foods to take place here, be introduced into the European dietary system. Potatoes and maize. Wonder where you think they came from? Where did potatoes and maize come from? Because they are not natural to Europe, and they came from the New World. In Peru, there are 50 varieties of potatoes. Maize, of course, is corn, Indian corn. And these food products would feed the starving mouths of Europeans. And for many of the Europeans, particularly in the clergy, they say, well, you don't need to eat potatoes and maize even though you're hungry. They cause flatulence, if you understand what I'm talking about. that. But for many of these hungry Europeans, it didn't make a bit of difference, as long as they had a full belly with that. Some members of the clergy said potatoes and maize are not mentioned in the Holy Bible, and if it's not mentioned in the Holy Bible, then you should not consume those. Okay, here. Now watch what the population does here in Europe here, folks, in cities. You can read this yourself. I'm running out of time here, folks, because I know you have other things to take care of with your videos. Amsterdam's population, 200,000. Naples, 500,000. London, 860,000. And Paris, which is 500,000. By today's standards here, I didn't write this down for you here, folks. By today's standards, we find that London has a population of 8.7 million. Paris has a population of 2.2 million. And I didn't write this down for you. Tokyo has a population of 9.3 million. And anyway, all right, so let's see here. I think I'll hold off on the rest of this about carding and spinning and weaving until the next time that we are together here. All righty, folks, a lot of material. We spent quite a bit of time on this today. I'm looking at about 45 minutes of a lecture, and I don't like to really go that long because you have so many other things to take care of. Okay, stay with your material. You're going to have an examination coming up soon, and you cannot learn this overnight. I promise you, good folks. All right, thank you.